Welcome to this new Nutrition Business Podcast. My name is Julian Mellentin, and today I'm going to talk to you about how animal protein has become the most important growth trend in the business of food, nutrition, and health, and why that's set to continue for the next 3 to 5 years. Dairy protein has very much been in the lead for the past 15 or 20 years and can really take the credit for making animal proteins more and more interesting and acceptable to consumers. But what's also really interesting is that consumer interest in increasing their consumption of red meat for better health and nutrition is also rising among the most health-forward segment of the population. It's niche, but it's present and it's increasing. And hand in hand with that goes an increasing rejection of the negative messages around meat and its alleged links to various diseases, and meat's sustainability position. Now, to some people, these statements will sound shocking, even heretical. Haven't we been told again and again that plant-based is where people are heading, that flexitarianism is the future, and that people are reducing their consumption of meat and dairy, indeed, that they must to save the planet? Most commentators don't seem to realize that we humans are in fact omnivores. And in fact, our diets already are plant-based and always have been. Now, in 2012, the last year for which we found credible data, around 75% of the calories consumed by Americans were from plants. So you hear arguments about diets being, protein heavy or meat heavy or whatever, and those statements simply aren't backed up by reality. If anything, the percentage of diets in which the calories come from plants seems to have increased since 2012. And I'm not citing the number because we haven't found a really credible one yet. Now, plant-based eating has definitely been an important growth development in nutrition and health since about 2012. However, over the course of the past, say, 3 or 4 years, things have been quietly changing, led by the consumer. And it's the consumer who is always in the driving seat. Our discussion of the rise of animal protein to being the number one growth trend in nutrition and health is something you'll find in our annual forecast of the 10 most important growth trends called 10 Key Trends 2025. It's what we're best known for within the food industry. It's what our customers value the most. It's something we've been doing for 20 years. And as I say, we've just published the version for 2025. It has 138 action-packed and informative pages. It's used by companies from New Zealand and Australia to America, Japan, Brazil, Sweden, Spain, and all points in between. And you can find it on our website at www.new-nutrition.com. So if you find anything that I say today interesting, please go there and you will learn so much more. Now, we're very deliberately completely different from all the other trend reports that you'll hear about out there, both in the way we spend all our time researching and analyzing a mass of qualitative and quantitative information from around the world, and the way we present that information and our analysis of it in as user-friendly a way as possible. We don't just set out what the trends are, because anybody can do that. What we do is we explore and explain why it's a trend, and we do this in detail. And we cover every aspect of the things that make a trend, from emerging science to consumer behavior to corporate strategies. And we set out what strategies companies are following to make a success of the consumer growth trends, and which ones they can realistically follow in the future in order to be successful. And everything is illustrated with lots of examples from brands around the world. So this statement that animal protein is now the most important growth trend will come as a surprise to anyone who thinks that the consumer move to more plant-based, which I said before kicked off about 2012, was some kind of unstoppable force. Certainly, that's what we're always told by the media. It's what we're told by politicians, by eco-activists, by billionaire investors, and so on and so forth. And some of you may have come across a phrase called the protein transition, or the great protein transition. It's an idea that this inevitability has to arise in order to reduce meat and dairy consumption in order to feed the planet. There's a couple of problems with that, of course, which is that the places in the world where the population is increasing to need more protein consumption are basically nowhere except Africa, because as some of you will have seen, birth rates are falling really sharply. So if anything, demand for protein in most of the world is probably going to plateau in the years ahead. The idea that we need to create new proteins to feed a growing population would be credible if only we were bothering to create proteins for the benefit of the many people in Africa who will need them. But one thing which all the people in the alternative protein world have in common is none of them is paying any attention to Africa, because the strategy of alternative proteins is about taking a share of the premium Western markets. In other words, taking market share from meat and dairy. Why is that? Because all the alternative protein world is backed by billionaire investors who 10, 12 years ago latched on to this idea of the protein transition as another way to make another big pile of money. I've sat in enough meetings with people from the world of alternative proteins to know that that is really their motivation, no matter what their PR statements say. Now, the interesting thing is that this big idea of a protein transition has not worked out. In fact, it's already possible to say that it's failed. As most of you will have seen, sales of plant-based meat substitutes are flat in most countries or falling, and they haven't achieved more than micro-niche status. Sales of dairy alternatives are niche. Even plant milks, which are often described as mainstream, aren't. They're a niche business. Even in America, they've only attained 9% market share after 30 years of marketing. And in most countries, most dairy alternative categories have sales that are falling. Why? Well, they don't taste very good, they have long ingredient lists, they have poor nutritional profiles, and they simply don't fit into most food cultures. And those dairy alternative brands that are around mostly don't make a profit. Some of you will have be familiar with the oat milk brand Oatly, which has been very good at drawing publicity to itself. Oatly is big, everyone's heard of it, but it doesn't make a profit. In fact, it has $1 billion of cumulative losses on its balance sheet. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. Once you get to all the other dairy alternatives, the picture gets really ugly. Now, I just want to say we're not alone in identifying that consumer demand for animal protein is the biggest growth trend. Some of you will be familiar with the supermarket chain Whole Foods Markets. It's the leading natural foods retail chain in the US. It actually belongs to Amazon, and they have more than 500 stores. And they have a very strong understanding of the preferences of the most health-active American consumer. Every year, Whole Foods Markets produces a forecast of changing consumer behavior. And one of its top trends for 2025 is what it calls protein power-up. And this is what Whole Foods says, quote, consumers are looking to incorporate more protein in their diet beyond traditional powders and bars, with an emphasis on ramping up protein consumption at mealtimes and with whole food snacking. Recipes incorporating cottage cheese may have kickstarted the consumer's desire to seek out protein in whole food sources, with consumers now prioritizing animal protein. So let's say that one more time. Consumers prioritizing animal proteins. Now, Whole Foods' reference to cottage cheese is relevant because it is in fact dairy protein that has been in the lead in developing or helping develop growing consumer demand for animal proteins over the course of the past 15 years. And the dairy industry, as we'll cover off in a couple of seconds in more detail, has done a great job of talking about the intrinsic, all-natural, whole food benefits of dairy protein, which is, along with meat, one of the highest quality proteins. But there's another quiet change emerging. Red meat is beginning to come out behind dairy as a must-have protein among a growing percentage of the most health-forward consumers. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment this is going to result in more demand for steaks, but it is already showing up as impressively growing demand for meat in extremely convenient forms, such as meat snacking, and we'll come back to some examples of that in a few minutes. Now, some of you will be wondering how it can be that things like red meat can have an increase in popularity. Aren't we all told all the time, constantly, that red meat is somehow going to be responsible for destroying the planet? Well, there's a bit of a problem. Humans, if their behavior is to change, like carrots more than they like sticks. And the advocates for reducing meat consumption have made a big mistake by focusing only on the negative. When people hear constantly that eating meat, and meat, remember, is part of people's lives, it's part of food culture in every country in the world, when they're told that eating meat is going to result in global boiling or a climate crisis, when they're constantly shrieked at and told that they're somehow to blame, it has the effect of essentially turning people off. So those who advocate for reduced meat and dairy in the diet have simply demonstrated that they know nothing at all about the power of marketing and persuasion and how you get people to understand things. And it's made a little bit more complicated by the shrieky anti-meat advocates because, thanks to everyone having a mobile device in their pocket, they can go out and do their own research. They can go and find that the amount of methane, for example, produced by cattle is nothing like as much as some people like to claim. They can find that many of the claimed negatives in relation to sustainability and climate are disputed, and they can find that information from reputable sources. When it comes to red meat and disease, they can go and read online, and we'll talk about where they find that information in a moment, that the link claimed between red meat and colorectal cancer is not how it's been presented. You do not have a 26% increased risk of cancer, which is how it's often presented in the media. In fact, it's only about 1%, or as a doctor said to me, that's how we doctors say zero. And it's a sign of how consumers are able to do their own research and make up their own mind that one of the messages in relation to both dairy and red meat, which is growing strongly and becoming more and more important, is talking about the animal being grass-fed. The grass-fed message already appears on about 7 to 8% of the red meat sold in the United States, and it's growing in lots of other markets, from Portugal to China. In the consumer's mind, it means better for my health, better for the planet, and better for the animal's welfare. 3 simple positive messages. And those simple messages enable people to feel good about their choice because they're doing something for themselves, for the animals, and for the planet. If only the anti-red meat advocates could bother to have learnt such a simple communication technique. So a quick recap about where the animal protein trend came from, because it's always useful to know the history of something. It all started with dairy protein. Dairy protein is a great example of sustainability and upcycling because historically, the whey protein, which is the byproduct of cheese making, didn't have much use. It was used to feed animals in many countries or even put on the land as fertilizer. That began to change in the late 1980s and during the 1990s as the growing body of science enabled us to understand that there are benefits for human muscle repair from dairy protein. It began to be sold in powdered form for bodybuilders and people doing fitness and sports. For these people, it was ideal because it rapidly triggered the building of muscle mass and for recovery after sport. Now, it's always worth noting, by the way, that how many trends in food, nutrition, health start with sports and fitness people. And if you have a new concept or a new idea, they're the place to go because they're really looking for something that will enable them to perform better. Now, the big shift really came around 2010, when from that time, scientific studies began to establish proteins as being very important in effective weight management. So possibly the landmark study, which was published in 2010 in the New England Journal of Medicine, which was the world's biggest ever weight management study, essentially established that the most effective eating pattern for weight management was a diet that was high in quality protein, and they used dairy protein, and had a low blood sugar response. It was a giant study, cost the European Union $30 to $40 million. It involved multiple universities. It was led by Professor Arne Astrup at Copenhagen University. Now, inevitably, this news that eating high quality protein, specifically dairy protein, helped with weight management made its way into the media. It became a discussion in the media about the positives of protein. And of course, when you have 1 or 2 studies looking at an area and getting results, that prompts lots of other researchers to look in the same area. So the body of research linking protein quality from animal protein to better weight management just built up from there. And this coincided with more dairy products beginning to talk about their intrinsic, their natural dairy protein content. And a really good example of that is the huge growth in Greek yogurt in the United States, led by the Chobani brand, a trend which rapidly went around the world, in China as well, and all across Asia. And then the rest of the dairy industry began, wherever possible, to figure out how to increase the protein content or talk about protein in their own products. And it spread from things like yogurt and other cultured products, even to ice cream. Some of you will be familiar with the Halo Top ice cream brand, which was a huge success. It was differentiated in the ice cream market by being low calorie, low sugar, and having a high protein content, which was an innovation at the time. So this huge surge in product innovation by the dairy industry means that by the time you get to 2020, consuming protein from dairy has become a mass market, everyday activity in the supermarket aisle, pretty much everywhere in the world. And that shows no sign of slowing down. According to recent information from Circana, which used to be called IRI, they're one of only two really credible sources of supermarket sales data. Circana said that in 2024, the total increase of sales in dairy products with a high protein content in the US was about 17%. That's 17%. That's very impressive. And it's a similar story in many other countries. Now, just to blow our own trumpet here at New Nutrition Business, we first highlighted the growth opportunity in protein, and specifically dairy protein, back in 2011. And we were reminded of it recently by one of our customers who had kept our report from that time, and he was kind enough to tell us how prescient we'd been. So what about red meat? Where does that come in? Well, this is where it starts to get really interesting. Some of you will know that a diet now exists called the carnivore diet. There's even a version of it called the semi-carnivore diet, where people eat some honey and some fruit. And sometimes it's referred to as the lion diet. It's among people who mostly live on animal foods, eggs, beef, lamb, and so on. Now, some of you will immediately think that this is unhealthy and insane. And indeed, when I first heard of the carnivore diet around 2016, I thought it was a strange thing to do as well. But in 2024, it's looking a lot less strange. In our own qualitative and quantitative research, we found that it's a diet growing in every country that we've looked at. In the United States in 2024, we found about 5% of Americans were following a vegan diet, and about 5% were following a carnivore diet. Now, vegan and carnivore diets, of course, have nothing in common. They're literally poles apart. They're both exclusionary diets. It's entirely understandable for you to think that neither of them sounds particularly healthy, but veganism has shrunk. It's shrunk back to being a niche diet. Carnivore at the moment is on the increase. There are people, of course, who argue that you can eat a vegan diet and be healthy. Puzzlingly, even dietitians say this. I've really no idea how they can come to that conclusion, given that the only way you can be healthy is to take lots of supplements, getting all the nutrients, the B vitamins, the choline, the quality amino acids and so on, which simply aren't available in most plant-based diets. And yes, you could level the same kind of accusations at carnivore and semi-carnivore diets. And some of you will be saying, but surely we're always reading in the mainstream media that meat reducing is a big habit. Now, in our own survey, we find about 21% of people say they're reducing their meat consumption in the United States, slightly higher in other countries like the UK, maybe 24 or 25%. There's no country really where it's more than that. If you see anyone claiming a higher number, then they just haven't done their homework very well. But here's the surprising thing. In 2024, for the first time, not only do you find about 21% of people reducing their meat consumption, we found 9% of consumers in the countries we looked at were saying they were increasing their meat consumption. That's right, there aren't just people reducing it, they're increasing their red meat consumption for reasons of health and nutrition. And that's in addition to the ones who are being carnivore. The number of Americans who describe themselves as flexitarians seems to have peaked, according to other sources, about 18% of the population, but that seems to have declined. The number of flexitarians is now down to 12% of the population, and that information comes from excellent work by a firm called 210 Analytics, who again have access to good quality supermarket sales data. And 210 Analytics has also found that the people who describe themselves as meat eaters, which was 73% of Americans in 2021, is now increased to 80%. And when people are asked, do meat and poultry belong in a healthy, balanced lifestyle, 73% agree. Only 5% disagree. Now, some people might say, but that's just Americans. They're huge consumers of meat. Well, actually, they're not. The biggest per capita consumers of meat are, in fact, in Hong Kong. Now, this trend to revive meat consumption is showing up in lots of places. In Sweden, for example, the country's leading plant-based brand, so a company that makes meat substitutes and other plant-based products, called Orkla, they conducted a consumer survey and they found that 50% of Swedes are eating exactly the same amount of red meat as they've always eaten. And in fact, meat consumption in Sweden has increased. 24% of Swedes surveyed said that they are increasing their consumption of red meat for reasons of health and nutrition and taste. And we found people increasing their consumption of red meat in Brazil, Australia, and even the UK. So again, we're not talking as big a percentage of Sweden, but maybe about 9 or 10% of the population. Interestingly, the habit of meat reducing skews not towards younger consumers, as we're often told, but towards older consumers. The work by 210 Analytics found that of the people who are meat reducers, a quarter are aged 65 plus. If you go down to the 35 to 44-year-old age group, only 12% of meat reducers, and that number falls off as you get into the younger age groups. Now, some of you will be wondering where people are getting their information from that enables them to change their mind and actually increase their red meat consumption. Well, what you have to bear in mind is that mainstream media is also losing its credibility among younger consumers. And there's some very good reasons, which we'll come back to on that. For people under the age of 40, 45, social media is now their mainstream media. Our own research has found that more than half of young people go to social media first for their information on health and nutrition, and most of them go nowhere else. And it's also worth bearing in mind this information isn't just coming from non-serious influencers and the Kardashians. If you go online, look on Instagram and TikTok and so on, and on YouTube, you can find a wealth of information from serious research scientists, from people at Harvard Medical School, from university professors, medical doctors, cardiovascular surgeons, and they're talking about the diversity of information that there is about food, nutrition, and health. They share information about how questionable has been the negative messaging around meat in recent years. They talk about the benefits of amino acids. They talk about high quality protein. They talk about nutrient density, all of which are areas where red meat and dairy score very highly. They can learn that the alleged connection between red meat and heart disease is close to zero. They tell people what academic papers you can find that in. They can also learn that the claim that red meat causes colorectal cancer is based on extremely flimsy evidence, something called nutritional epidemiology, which it seems only nutrition professors are willing to take seriously. You show nutrition epidemiology to an engineer and watch how they laugh at the very low quality data collection methods. So people are able to do their own research from reputable places. They're able to discover that things are not quite as one-sided as they've been presented, and they're able to make up their own mind about how they want to eat. Some of you will be thinking that this increase in red meat consumption is entirely among males, and they do skew strongly in that direction, but it's also beginning to surface among younger female consumers and influencers. Our own research has found Gen Z women consuming a ribeye steak once a week because they understand that they benefit from the nutrients, particularly the B vitamins that give them energy, and the iron, which is important for young women's health. On Instagram, for example, you'll find someone called Courtney Luna. She has 161,000 followers. She's authored a book called Carnivore in the Kitchen. There's the Steak and Butter Gal on Instagram with 364,000 followers. They're talking about the intrinsic natural health benefits of red meat for women's health. And this hasn't come out of the blue. Most of you will be aware of the huge surge in demand for collagen from about 2014 onwards. It's a great example that shows how people are very happy to have both plant-based and animal-based foods in their diet when they see the benefit of those different foods. Women of all ages, but particularly Gen Z and younger millennials, have eagerly embraced collagen. And yes, that's often bovine collagen or dairy collagen, which is an important protein in the human body and has well-supported benefits in relation to the health of skin, hair, nails, and joints, which makes it appealing to anyone doing sports. Human motivations. The most important human motivation, after all, is to look good and feel good. So it isn't too surprising that anything, such as red meat, such as dairy protein, that people read about and learn about as something that's going to enable them to achieve their objectives is going to become popular. Collagen has moved from being a niche interest 10 years ago to something that's mass market, that people routinely add to their morning smoothie or to their coffee. It's also the case that even for young female consumers who say they only follow a plant-based diet are simultaneously consuming collagen, that's dairy or bovine collagen, because they want the benefits of it. People are not simple. People are not obsessed just with plants. They're happy to have an omnivore approach where that benefits them. And the success of collagen is seen by the way that Nestle has gone into the collagen business. It acquired the US market leader, a firm called Vital Proteins, which had gone from zero to $300 million in sales in just side 5 years. And Nestle has rolled out that brand in Europe and in China. Now, I said before that I'm in no sense are we suggesting there's going to be a surge in sales of steaks, but what there is a surge in sales of meat in its most convenient forms. And you can see this best in the example of meat snacking. Meat snacking is one of the largest, most profitable, and most successful categories in the supermarket in the United States. And yes, many other countries, will come back to that shortly. In the US, retail sales of meat snacks are already about $4.7 billion. That dwarfs many other areas, including most plant-based areas. And no, it's not just an American habit. Meat snacking is growing in Europe. The amount of retail shelf space dedicated to meat snacks in France has grown by more than 100% in recent years. When you travel in Germany or Belgium or the UK, what you see is a huge increase in the amount of space dedicated to meat snacking, particularly in convenience stores. Companies' creative new product development has delivered a wealth of new flavors and textures. Companies have come up with snacks which are softer than the traditional types. They have found ways of widening their appeal with interesting spices. They've gone beyond beef and pork, even to have snacks based on turkey and chicken. These last appeal to people who are looking for products with less fat. And chicken snacking brands are growing very rapidly in the US. In fact, what's happening now is that major food companies in the US are beginning to see how meat snacking fits into their healthier and better for you portfolio and will be set to grow for some years to come. So a really good example in 2004 is Conagra, which is America's biggest ready meal company. Their Healthy Choice range is the biggest ready meal brand in the US. I think it's got nearly $1 billion in sales. As a company, it's very focused on health. And in 2024, Conagra acquired a company called the Sweetwater Smoking Company, owner of a brand called Fatty Smoked Meat Sticks. They're basically pork and beef sticks like tiny salamis. Now, the president and CEO of Conagra explained the acquisition was, quote, another step in reshaping our portfolio for faster growth, close quote. So that's right. Demand for meat snacking, demand for meat in convenient forms is increasing. Companies like Conagra can see it, and they can see that meat snacks fit inside their healthier foods portfolio. This move by Conagra is really significant, and they're not the only company doing this, because so far it's only been led by entrepreneurial companies. Now, another American example is a brand called Chomps. Launched in 2013, by 2023, sales had passed $245 million. And in that year, it was the seventh fastest growing consumer brand in America. Sales in 2024 are expected to be more than 224 million. What's the brand's proposition? It's grass-fed. Do you remember we discussed that earlier on? Better for me, better for the planet, better for animal welfare. The products are free from nitrates, they're free from sugar, and that matters because more and more people, particularly younger people, are looking to find ways to have snacks that are free from sugar. The products have a variety of flavors and soft textures, and the main market for the brand, well, that was women, aged 25 to 45, until very recently. They accounted for 70% of sales. They're looking for clean label, low sugar, high protein snacks that they can feel good about because there's a sustainability message, like grass-fed, that makes sense to them and they can easily understand. The company is now, of course, trying to grow its appeal with males, but it really is a sign of the times that 70% of its business was among women, and it's women that made it as successful as it is. This isn't just an American story. Brands in Europe are growing. In the UK, for example, there's a brand called Pepperami. It's grown very steadily. By 2021, it had sales of $120 million. By 2024, that was over $150 million, and that's just in the UK alone. It's done this as a result of having more interesting flavors, better ingredient lists, the emphasis on the value of the protein kick, and much else besides. One of the big drivers of growth for dairy protein over the past 15 years is the way the dairy industry has been able to deliver it in convenient snacking forms. If red meat producers are able to deliver the benefits of Red meat protein in convenient snacking forms, like the examples we just gave, they have just as bright a future in front of them, because that is what consumers want. Now, there are also new areas in relation to animal protein which are going to pull protein demand further. One is in relation to energy. You can find in our 10 Key Trends 2025, we have a whole section dedicated to energy. Energy has always been one of the top 5 or 6 priorities for consumers. It's been like that for 30 plus years, and that's what's given rise to the tremendous success of energy drinks. But not everyone wants an energy drink. Some people want sustained energy in a kind of more natural and whole food way. The interest in protein for energy began with sports and fitness, and it's beginning to spread a little bit more widely. And more companies are looking at how they can add animal protein to foods and beverages and create an energy message. So a recent example is Starbucks, which launched a coffee drink recently combined with protein. It's made for them by Arla, one of the world's largest dairy companies. So it combines coffee, the original energy drink, with the high protein proposition. So why did Starbucks do this? Well, it's because their consumer data showed that Starbucks shoppers are big fans of protein. They're buying protein supplements 6 times more frequently than the average consumer. So the marketing for Starbucks higher protein coffee focuses on taste with the tagline, quote, protein never tasted so good. And yes, good taste is one of the big competitive advantages of animal protein, certainly over most plant proteins. If you're trying to formulate plant protein into a product, you often have to work really hard to hide the quite bitter tastes. The target market for Starbucks protein drink is young consumers looking for something to fuel their morning workout or needing energy on the go in the afternoon, the company says. Advertising for the product shows people in their 20s or 30s enjoying Starbucks high protein coffee while recovering from sports and even yoga. And the other area where we'll see more attention to protein is in digestive wellness. Now, that shouldn't be too surprising because digestive wellness has been one of the biggest growth trends for more than 30 years for our industry. It's a hugely competitive area, and it isn't surprising perhaps because about 30% of us will have a digestive disorder of some kind or other. And where does protein come in? Well, just to give an example, gelatin and collagen, for example, contain glutamine and glycine. These are 2 amino acids that support gut health, and amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So these 2 in particular help strengthen the intestinal lining. They reduce intestinal permeability, so things don't leak across between the gut and the bloodstream. There's a growing body of published literature supporting this. It's been shown they can play a role in reducing symptoms such as ulcerative colitis, which is a surprisingly common and painful gut health problem that affects about 10% of people. There are even dietitians beginning to communicate about the benefits of proteins for improved digestive wellness, and you'll find that in mainstream as well as social media. They talk about the benefits of animal proteins in whole food, natural forms such as salmon, dairy, and beef. Of course, at the moment, consumer awareness of this is extremely low, but don't dismiss it because it's just at day one. What's happening at the moment is the protein and digestive wellness connection is being pioneered by bone broth brands. Now, if that sounds a bit old-fashioned to you, don't let it, because sales of bone broth are growing. Gen Z are picking up the habit. If you go to Southern California, and that's where most trends start, which spread across America and then to the rest of Europe, you'll find supermarket shelves laden with different bone broth brands, most of them including some messaging about digestive wellness. And while we're on the subject of California, just bear in mind, as we all know, California is the seat of lots of trends. It's a place where many people from the food industry around the world go to see what's coming next. So it's worth bearing in mind that when even Californians give up on a trend, that tells you it's over. In California, vegan restaurants are putting meat back on the menu. Many well-known Los Angeles restaurants are adding meat, dairy, or both to their menus to widen their appeal and avoid the fate of the many vegan restaurants which are closing their doors permanently. Local media now keeps a running total of how many vegan cafes, bakeries, and restaurants are shutting down permanently. In 1 month alone, in 2024, 15 such outlets closed permanently in Los Angeles alone. An increasing number of vegan and vegetarian restaurants are bringing in meat and dairy to maintain their appeal. For example, in Los Angeles, a chain called Burger Lords, which was vegan only, in 2023 introduced beef burgers using, yes, grass-fed beef. The restaurant's owners cited lack of consumer interest in the vegan menu is the reason for the change. An outlet called Margot's Vegan Pizza Chain has also added meat to its menu. They began with something called the Meat Lover's Pizza, and it's a pizza absolutely laden with meat. It's the anti-vegan product. Local media in Los Angeles report that the first week of sales of the new Meat Lover's Pizza produced one of this chain's most successful weeks ever. Another pizza chain, the Hot Tongue Pizza Chain, which was also vegan, began offering pizzas with mozzarella, ricotta, and parmesan alongside vegan fare, significantly boosting the chain's sales and enabling it to survive and thrive. Now, I just want to emphasize we're not saying that plant-based is going away or that plant-based proteins and lab meats are going to disappear. It's not a question of one thing conquering another. It's simply the fact that we must recognize that humans have access to lots of information. They have access to information from reputable sources about the benefits of animal proteins, both dairy and red meat, that people's views about food and health are fragmented, and that humans are, and have been throughout history, omnivores. They're willing and able to enjoy a diversity of foods in their diet for pleasure, for health, and as part of their food culture. For most people, carnivore diets and vegan diets will probably always remain somewhat extreme and somewhat niche, but all the rest of the people in the middle, they're accustomed to the familiarity, the taste, the texture, the versatility, the naturalness of animal proteins, the strong place they have in every single food culture in every part of the world, the role that animal proteins have in traditional recipes, in family eating occasions. The kind of anti-meat rhetoric of the past 10 years failed to take all those powers into account. And more people are rediscovering those powers and those joys. And as the message about animal protein's intrinsic benefits, from protein quality to nutrient density to weight management to more energy to improving gut health, as those messages spread on social media, it will probably cause even more people to start to prioritize animal proteins in their diet. And you see this on social media. People who've been vegetarian or been vegan for a period of time, including lots of sports people, reporting improvements in their health when they start including animal protein in their diet again. Animal proteins are now the most important growth trend in the whole business of food, nutrition, and health, and are certainly set to stay that way for the next 5 years. Thank you all for listening to this podcast and to listening to the radical and heretical news about animal protein. If you have felt stimulated by what I've said or even annoyed, why don't you go to our website, www.new-nutrition.com, and why not buy yourself a copy of 10 Key Trends in Food, Nutrition and Health 2025. It's available in both PDF and in PowerPoint, so you can incorporate our information into your own presentations. The fact that so many companies in so many countries have chosen to use our work for so long suggests that maybe we're not too bad at getting this stuff right. Thank you all very much for your time. I'm sorry for the slightly hoarse voice. I'm getting over a cold. I hope you all have a very enjoyable day. And thank you. I look forward to talking to you again sometime.